So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Felicia. A little background on me. I used to be a preschool teacher for about 5 years. And then I was a private swim instructor, mostly working with kids for 15 years. And then I stepped away from working to be a stay-at-home wife and then a stay-at-home mom. So that's what I've been doing for pretty much the past 10 to 13 years, is kind of just staying home. Becoming a mom really set me on a path of wanting to understand more and empower myself more on how I can heal and take care of my family in a more like holistic way. I've always been really into the holistic world. I've, been seeing an energy healer since I was a teenager. And so I ended up getting my Reiki 2 certification. I study a system called human design. And I've also been studying more like Eastern type practices when it comes to medicine and healing. The energy work is something that like I'm really interested in when it comes to healing ourselves and other people. And that's kind of where I got introduced to this method, the grief recovery method. I was in a course with one of my spiritual teachers, and she introduced the book to me. And honestly, I bought it and I read a little bit through it. And then I kind of just put it on my shelf and it sat there for a little bit of time until I was facing some really difficult marital issues. And I picked up the book again and I was like, I think this is really going to help us. And so together we read the book. We read it, we listened to the audio, we did the work together, and it really helped set healing to our relationship in motion. It was not the only tool that we utilized. I'm not one that believes that there's like one method that fixes everything. It's nice to have different tools to use, but we found this one to be extremely helpful in at least helping to set a nice, grounded, solid foundation for us to build on our relationship and even other relationships in our life. Um, Even like with our parenting, we found it to be very useful in like how we even approach our child and if anybody's worked with kids, you know that kids can have some very strong emotions. They come already connected to that part of themselves, and it's through life that we become disconnected from that. So the way we approach parenting has changed based off of this book, and the way that we have approach our other relationships in our life has really changed based off of this book. And so we decided to get certified to be specialists so we can help teach other people these tools that we have found to be very useful and lifelong tools that we want to give to other people so that they don't have to struggle and that they can experience more joy and better relationships in their lives as well.
My name's Chris. Little background on me. Actually come from a Western medicine background. I've been a nurse for 16 years now, a nurse practitioner for 10 of those years. So I have obviously like a very good understanding of the Western medicine side of the grief process, loss, emotional distress, and all that stuff. Um, like Felicia had mentioned, we had about 4 years ago kind of hit our own brick wall, so to speak. Lots of things in, I guess, essentially my life not going the way I thought they should be, and kind of created chaos into our life. Um, and it wasn't initially through this method, like Felicia was saying, it's a multiple different methods, but it wasn't necessarily this method that started to help out, but it kind of set the course for us to want to do more grief work and healing work for people. Um, Felicia and I both went through a much more intensive 7-day workshop, which essentially did the same thing, helped heal grief. Uh, and in the process of that, we realized we wanted to do this work. So we actually pushed to learn that process, the 7-day process, and do the work that route. And we started to. So like the grief work, even this grief recovery stuff isn't new to us by any means. It's just a different method. So we actually took this course to help us with the other course, and we realized it's much more. It's going to be a lot more feasible for people to facilitate this kind of grief work versus the workshop. Because it was hard. It's hard for people to leave their job or leave their house for 7 days total, 3 days the first week, 4 days the next, put time off work to leave, because we actually had people stay somewhere away from home. We realized that we can get same results, essentially giving people the tools to help themselves with grief and loss through this modality. And yeah, I mean, sure as heck, as soon as we went through the process a few years ago, we realized the benefits. We got the opportunity to actually train with the creator of this process, his son, who ended up taking over the business after he passed. Um, and we got a hands-on experience from like, one of the direct sources of it. But again, too, it helped really solidify that this is the kind of work we want to do and the right way to do it. Hey, Joey. But yeah, so it's like I said, this is definitely nothing new to us. We've been kind of involved with this kind of work for 4+ years, even as a nurse. We deal in, unfortunately, grief and loss. I've been dealing with it for the last 16 years because it's part of my job. So it's nothing new to us. It's just we finally feel comfortable or have a really solid way that we can teach people how to do it on their own. Because that's one of the biggest things we notice is that Western medicine and therapies, they don't quite give you the tools, they just help you. And we're here to give you the tools to do it yourself, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to do it on your own. So we're going to kind of go through a lot of the kind of misconceptions and just the different topics in grief. We have a few goals that we're going to go through today. So one of the things we want to go through is kind of define grief. People have a set mindset of what grief is, and it's much bigger than that. The second thing we're going to go through is identifying reasons why grief is so misunderstood. The third aspect would be identifying ways that unresolved grief has impact on your life, young and as youth and as adults. We're also going to discuss the source of their grief and our grief, and then also identify ways to relieve some of that grief we carry. I think with that, we'll have Felicia start us off.
Yeah, so defining grief. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to change or loss of any kind. Grief by any name is still grief. So to me, what that means on here, it has the word stress, burnout, PTSD, complicated grief, depression, anxiety. There are many different labels, many different diagnoses that you can receive. But ultimately, what we are saying is that you are dealing with grief, unresolved grief. A lot of people think that this term just means the death of a loved one or someone that they knew or cared about. But what we are saying, what this method is saying, is that grief is way more broad than that. And to be really honest, 100% of people are dealing with grief. You can, it's safe to assume that anyone that you interact with, even if it's someone at the grocery store, is dealing with grief. It's very, very common. It's normal and a natural reaction to change or loss of any kind, any kind. Um, Grief is the response to a change in or and of any familiar pattern or behavior. So let's see, any familiar patterns or behaviors. Let's say that you move, and that is a complete change to your everyday pattern and behavior. The move itself doesn't necessarily have to be a negative event, but the fact that your everyday normal is being changed can come with some grief. I know us moving up here was really positive for us, but I had to grieve the fact that I was not in walking distance to 5 different parks that I would go with my son on almost a daily basis. I love being where we are and I love what we have. And there are parks that are close by that I can drive to. But that was a big change in my everyday normal pattern and behavior. Grief is also about mixed emotions. So there could be grief around graduations, moves, birth, loss of um, loss of addictions, and even death. I can definitely relate to the birth part of it. That's a big change in someone's everyday normal. You know, you go from being single somewhat, just getting to worry about yourself, to like having to take care and be responsible for this other living being. And that's a mixed emotion because, of course, most of the time you're very excited that you have this like little bundle of joy, this like blessing, but it's a big, big change in your life that is not really talked about on that level. People just don't want to talk about grief, so they're just like, be happy that you have a baby. You know, why are you so sad? Like you're grieving a life that you used to have and you no longer have anymore, and that's okay. Um, Grief is also the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there for you, only to find that when you need them one more time, they're not there. Or it's also reaching out for someone who's never been there for you, only to find that when you need them one more time, they are still not there. So a lot of the times we have relationships in our lives where we can like call upon someone. Let's say it's like a best friend, but then you guys have a falling out. So that's grief, like reaching out for this person who's always been there for you, and then they're no longer there anymore. Maybe you had what we call a less than loved one relationship where it was someone you felt that should have always been there for you, but every time you reached out for them, they never were available for you. And then you reach out one more time and they're still not available for you. That is also grief. And so that's why we, or I, like we talk about how this method has really helped us with relationships and getting complete with our emotions and our relationships and understanding first what our grief actually is. Uh, let's see, what causes grief? So we go through life and we pick up what we call rocks. Sometimes they're pebbles, sometimes they're boulders. And this begins in childhood. We pick them up and we put them into our backpacks, and then we start lugging these around. We're not taught how to deal with them. More come into our backpack as we age and go through life. We don't take time to empty this backpack. And our rocks include all these painful events that happen in our lives. So your dog dies or runs away, or your parents get divorced, or you get divorced, you move. All of these are rocks, pebbles, or boulders that just get put into the backpack.
I mean, it's a touch on that too. Like she was saying, it starts very young. I mean, you could even go back to before you're speaking, even as soon as you're born, but yearning for a binky, lust for a blanket or wanting a blanket you can't have, crying for a bottle. These are all um, the start of grief. Because what's the child doing when they're crying for the mother's hug or kiss or the bottle or breast, right? They're grieving because they don't have it.
It doesn't need to be a conscious memory. The body feels it and the body has its own memory. So then when you get older, events happen and they trigger these feelings of not feeling safe from that time you lost your favorite blankie as a baby. You may not remember that, but your body remembers it. So also what can also cause some grief are what we call intangible losses. This is the loss of safety, the loss of security, the loss of trust, respect, faith, expectations, dreams, hopes, and the loss of your everyday normal. Um, I know that from just speaking personally from our marital experience, there was a significant loss in safety, trust, and security that we needed to grieve and rebuild. And that's, our personal story, part of it. Faith. A lot of people go into or are born into a faith, and then there's some type of betrayal that happens. And now you have like that loss of faith in that, maybe a loss of faith in your parents. Maybe there was something that happened between you and your parents and you lost trust or your safety. If you grew up with someone who was an addict, that could be a huge loss of safety in your life. So these are what we call intangible losses. Anything else to add?
And along with some of those intangible losses, I mean, another part of it could be even, um, I guess, kind of more serious things like traumas, PTSD, and that's kind of where that ties in, right? People have traumatic events, large examples, so like being robbed, your house broken into, um, just a violent action happening to you.
Abuse.
You lose that sense of safety and security you had at home, or trust that you had in the neighborhood, or the cops, or all that stuff is tied into these intangible losses, and they're a loss that you don't ever grieve. You just, unfortunately, a lot of people stay in that high anxiety phase or that PTSD, that quote unquote triggered phase, because they never process the loss or the loss of those intangible things.
Yeah.
And it keeps people stuck.
I actually really like too the expectations, the dreams, and the hope. Like we all go through life having expectations, having dreams, having hope, and there are sometimes these events that occur that we lose what we thought we were going to get or what we were hoping we were going to get. And so all of this, I like that a lot because I feel like that's more relatable to everybody on any scale.
So, so what kind of things cause your grief? So things you see and hear, right? Youth, elders, or family stories. Doing all the right things and still not succeeding can trigger your grief. Um, your mission, right? As a healthier community or a workplace, sometimes you just can't, right? And there's moral issues. I mean, I deal with that exact issue. I I treat people with Western medicine currently, and I have my own, you know, um, moral compass about it. And I want to treat people a certain way, but I'm held by certain standards in my licensure in Western medicine that I need to follow, even though I may not agree or they don't quite see people as patients versus a medical disease. And then on top of all the stuff that you deal with at work or school or community, it's like, oh wait, I still have a home life, right? So like with that, think about what kind of things or what griefs you have personally. Um, so like I said, grief begins in childhood and youth. We always talk about how little kids and babies they're born with bright eyes, right? They see the world through a different lens. They're born in harmony with intuition, intellect, and emotions. That's why they cry. They don't know how to talk. They only communicate through their emotion. Um, and that's like I said, that's how early it starts. Is from a very young age, from a newborn age. Now, what we're going to get into is why is grief so misunderstood? Um, and there's a really good analogy that we have. This little almost story. Imagine that you're told to go paint a house. Now, to paint this house, you're given three tools. You're given a hammer, a screwdriver, and a saw.
What's missing?
You'll figure out a way to paint the house. It'll get done eventually, but it's not going to get done maybe the right way, right? You're missing key components.
Efficiently.
It's not going to get done efficiently for sure. But we're human beings and we're creative. We always find a way to get things done. And that's part of the basic understanding of why grief is so misunderstood. Some of the myths and misinformation that we hear growing up, and I'm sure these should resonate, but when you're having these issues or we're dealing with grief, right? We hear, don't feel bad. We always hear when an animal, is lost or passes away, we replace the loss. What's the other saying you hear when you're younger, or if you go through a breakup? There's plenty of fish in the sea. She's not the right one, or he's not the right one. There's plenty of others out there. Mm-hmm. Again, replacing the loss. Grieving alone, right? Another misconception. We're told that people go, or you hear most oftenly, go cry in the room alone. The one I always actually more recently started hearing is people talking about an ugly cry, shaming your crying. I mean, that's a big one. You should be able to laugh loudly in front of people as equally as you should be able to cry in front of people without a negative connotation. And you know absolutely that that's not the case. So everyone gets scared when someone else is crying. What else do we always hear? Be strong. Be strong for others. Well, who's going to be strong for you? We often hear keep busy, keep your mind busy, picking up hobbies and things like that just to fill your time so you don't have to deal. Super big one, right? Time heals all. It just takes time.
You'll be okay eventually.
Yeah. And there's countless different things we hear, but these are kind of the main ones that we hear.
And what we learn about the take time is that with time, the intensity of the pain can dull, but you're still carrying it, you're still living with it, and there's been no action-based steps within that time that you've taken to actually deal with what had happened. So you may think that time has healed you because it feels less intense as a year, 2, or 10 go by. But then every time that anniversary comes around of that death of that loved one, and you're reminded of how brokenhearted you feel, that's the pain. So we're trying to help with the pain. We're not going to take anybody's sadness away, nor do we want to, because feeling sad is okay. That's an emotion, that's a feeling. And so we're trying to take the intense pain of it away so that you can live not feeling like this is a boulder in your backpack.
And very often what happens is one of the ways we deal with this grief and the misunderstood way is something that's called a STIRB. So a short-term any energy relieving behavior. These are things that most commonly you see as food, comfort eating, shopping, exercising, video games, uh, believe it or not, church, um, running away from the problems, right? It gets into deeper things like alcohol, violence, anger, people oversleeping, risk-taking behaviors, tobacco, drugs, tattoos, living in a fantasy, the more intense ones of sex, porn, gambling, the very worst of it being suicide. But these are the things that people resort to when they have this, they don't know how to deal with the grief. Um, but you catch yourself doing these small behaviors more often than not, just to try and, like when you get anxious, like, oh, I'm going to go eat something, or I'm going to go, I need to smoke. I'm getting too worked up from this.
Distracting yourself from feeling whatever it is you're feeling.
Now, the other thing we see pretty common too is what we call the Academy Award recovery. When people ask you, how you doing? What's the answer we always hear? The quick answer we give, I'm fine. You know, feeling fine, feelings inside not expressed. You're just shutting down. You're not giving people how you feel.
Your emotional truth.
Fine is just a statement. It's not a in depth of it, right?
I like to say trying.
Exactly. Right.
How you doing? Trying.
Trying to get by.
That's at least a little bit more honest.
Now, the other kick we get is as growing up, you always hear, suck it up, don't be a sissy, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about, put your big girl panties on, and things like that. But kids are like sponges and they absorb all this stuff, and that's where they learn these behaviors, which unfortunately they pass on as we get older and as we become adults, because we only know what we've been taught. And then you see by the teenage years, adolescent years, 12 to 15 or so, kids have unfortunately have lost the bright eyes, right? We hear the terrible teens type thing. That just firing them is
yeah,
sizzling.
I see so many like comments on posts recently, one where a teenager was stating that most teens have lost trust in their parents, that they're burnt out from school and life, and it's it's really disheartening to like see that that's where our youth is, that it's not getting better for them, you know, that it's getting almost worse.
So as we learn these, you know, these misconceptions of grief, that starts to build our belief systems. And like I was saying, this is what you learn and how you process things later on in life. And as we know, not all belief systems are correct. And that's kind of our goal here, is to help, and that's part of what we do as well, is help to reframe those belief systems or help you understand how they're not quite accurate. And it's no one's fault. It's just a job to recognize that and to rebuild it. So what are some of the different ways to relieve the grief that we carry? Yep, 5 minutes.
Okay, so ways to relieve the grief we carry. We can recover. Recovery comes by learning to make a series of small positive changes in our attitudes and then our behaviors. Means getting better, not healed, because this is an ongoing process. So these are tools that we want to teach you so that you can keep doing this throughout life. It's not like, oh, that's another one that we hear. I worked on this already. I dealt with all my trauma from my past. And it's like, but you're still a living being, interacting with people, living life, having events occur, and more things come up. It means let's see, come sooner with positive actions taking care, come sooner with appropriate support. What support systems do you have? Does your agency provide? Let's see, do you have anything to say about those ones?
Yeah.
No, we're running out of time on the Zoom. So we're like trying to make sure that they get. So ways to relieve grief that we carry, validate and acknowledge grief and trauma. So avoid the myth statements, avoid trying to tell someone these things that have been intellectually sound, but emotionally useless. That's how I like to word it. So telling someone that time heals all wounds or that there's plenty of fish in the sea, that's not incorrect. There are other people out there, but that's an intellectual statement. That's an intellectually sound statement, but it is emotionally useless. So then instead what you want to do, you gotta like turn the volume.
I'm trying.
You want to validate that. So I can't imagine how painful that must have been for you. Or what I'm hearing you say was that you were really terrified. So that you're emotionally connecting with the person sharing the story and even trying to use feeling words for yourself when you're sharing something. Identify the name, the loss, tangible and intangible, help name the feelings. They'll tell you the story, but they want you to hear how it feels. So a lot of times you'll hear people sharing something that sounds really tragic and painful, but there's no feelings. They're not mentioning any feelings in there. So that's where you can come in and be like, wow, that sounds really terrifying, or that sounds really heartbreaking. And a lot of times they'll feel like, yeah, that was actually really heartbreaking. Or if you don't have to get it right, if you get it wrong, they'll correct you. They'll be like, actually, no, like that was just like really disappointing, or whatever it is, but it gets them out of here and into here. And that's what we're trying to do with this method, is to get everybody out of here and connected more to their heart and their feelings.
So the way the grief recovery method works is there's 3 ways of learning, right? We see, we hear, and then we do by building muscle memory. So the method does involve, it involves storytelling, right? Meaning making. So we take the feelings that you have and we put meaning to it. We help you identify what those thoughts and feelings are. It gives voice to undelivered communication. So all those inside internalized thoughts and feelings that you had that you never got to say, we help you verbalize those and bring them into the universe, because that's the problem, is they were never completed when either the person was around or when the incident happened. And it's a systemic approach. So it helps organize your thoughts and feelings in what we do. So that way you're not flooded with emotion. It's not scattered. It's structured so you can see on a paper what, like even the graphs that we do, how intense certain things were. And it helps you, kind of strategize which one kind of hit you harder or which one was a better feeling. And then the other part of it is that it's an action-based program. So we connect and share with you, but also we have you do the process. So you're verbalizing and doing this with a partner, whether it be one-on-one with one of us or with a group setting, but we're making you do the work. It's not just reading a book and, oh, good idea, and then not doing it. We're going through the work with you.
Yeah. And we always share first.
Exactly.
So even if it's in a group setting or one-on-one, people think like, I'm just not ready to unpack that. Well, the first 3 sessions aren't what? Oh, it is.
It's been around for 40 years. It's in 6 different continents, and the book itself has been published in 20 different languages. And there's just thousands of trainers across the world. And then for the people who are into studies and stuff, there's plenty of actually knowledge-based evidence and current state studies that are all in regards to how the grief recovery process helps people. So what we'll do is that we'll probably conclude it there because our Zoom thing's going to time out right now.